On a routine flight from Denver to San Francisco, judgment was passed at 35,000 feet. A flight crew, seasoned and cynical, saw a young black woman in the throes of a panic attack and chose mockery over compassion. They saw a fragile teenager, a snowflake, succumbing to the pressures of a little turbulence. What they couldn't see was the truth hidden behind her terrified eyes. This young woman was Dr. Kenna Jordan, one of the world's most sought-after specialists in aviator trauma recovery. And she was on their plane for a reason that would soon bring their careers and their airline's reputation crashing down. The recycled air of Global Air Flight 732 tasted of plastic and faint disinfectant. Dr. Kenna Jordan, who looked a decade younger than her 27 years, settled into seat 12B. Dressed in comfortable grey sweats and with her braided hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, she could have easily been mistaken for a college student heading home for a break. This anonymity was a small comfort, a shield she used in a world that often refused to see past her youth and the colour of her skin to the doctorate and the heavy expertise she carried. She was a master of the mind, specifically the minds of those who commanded multi-million-dollar machines through the unpredictable skies. She specialized in the unique brand of PTSD that could ground a pilot for life, the kind born from a lightning strike that fries an avionics panel, the sickening lurch of a microburst on final approach, or the chilling silence after a catastrophic engine failure. She could deconstruct a pilot's terror and rebuild their confidence neuron by neuron. Yet as the Boeing 737 taxied onto the runway, Kenna's own meticulously controlled mind began to fray at the edges. She wasn't afraid of flying. Statistically, she knew it was the safest form of travel. Her fear was something more specific, a ghost tethered to a single, terrible sound. The engine spooled up with a deep guttural roar. The plane vibrated, a living thing straining against its brakes before hurtling down the tarmac. Kenna closed her eyes, her knuckles white on the armrest. She began her breathing exercises, the same ones she taught decorated veterans of the sky. In through the nose for 4, hold for 7, out through the mouth for 8. The flight was smooth for the first hour. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin crew began their service with practiced, weary smiles. The lead flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s named Bellamy, moved with an air of bored authority. Her blonde hair was shellacked into a perfect helmet, and her name tag was pinned with military precision. She'd been flying for 22 years, and her patience for passengers had worn thinner than the complimentary napkins. Her junior colleague, a young man named Leo, with an eager-to-please grin, followed in her wake, pushing the beverage cart. Kenna kept to herself, a book open on her lap that she wasn't reading. Her focus was inward, maintaining a fragile peace. The flight was a necessary evil. She was heading to San Francisco for an emergency consultation with a senior captain for Global Air, a man whose career was hanging by a thread after a near disaster over the Pacific. The airline's vice president of flight operations, a man named Mr. Peterson, had called her personally. "You're our last hope, Doctor," he had said, his voice tight with desperation. The descent began 2 hours later. The familiar hum of the engines changed pitch. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their initial approach into SFO. Kenna's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She knew what was coming. In for 4. Hold for 7. Out for 8. The plane banked, and the sprawling suburbs of the Bay Area tilted into view. Then came the sound. It was a loud hydraulic groan, followed by a resonant thump-clunk as the landing gear locked into place. For 99% of the passengers, it was a routine noise, a sign that they were almost home. For Kenna, it was the screech of tearing metal. It was the sound from the simulation, the one that went wrong. The one where the gear failed to deploy, and the virtual jet on the screen in front of her had cartwheeled into a fiery, pixelated grave. She had been observing a pilot's assessment, but the catastrophic failure, even simulated, had triggered a dormant trauma from a car accident in her youth. The sound was the link, the key that unlocked the monster in her mind. Her breath hitched. The cabin walls seemed to press in the air, thinning to a sharp, metallic vapor. Her vision tunneled. The calm, rational mind of Dr. Jordan dissolved, and in its place was a terrified young woman, trapped in a metal tube falling from the sky. A whimper escaped her lips. Her hands, slick with sweat, trembled violently. She fumbled for the air vent, twisting it until a weak stream of cold air ghosted across her face. It wasn't enough. Her breathing became ragged, audible gasps that cut through the low murmur of the cabin. Tears streamed down her face, hot and uncontrolled. She was having a full-blown panic attack, and the very training she used to help others was inaccessible, locked away behind a wall of pure, irrational terror. A passenger in the aisle seat, a kind-faced businessman, noticed her distress. "Miss, are you okay?" Kenna couldn't answer. She just shook her head, her body trembling. The man pressed the flight attendant call button. A moment later, Bellamy appeared, her expression a mask of annoyance. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice clipped. "This young lady," the man said, gesturing to Kenna. "I think she needs help. She's having a panic attack or something." Bellamy's eyes scanned Kenna's form, the sweatsuit, the braids, the tears, the youthful face. Her lips curled into a barely perceptible sneer. She saw a dramatic kid, not a passenger in genuine distress. "Ma'am," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "It's just a little turbulence. We're landing. You need to breathe." She spoke as if to a toddler having a tantrum. Kenna tried to speak, to explain, but only a choked sob came out. Bellamy rolled her eyes and turned back to the galley just a few feet away. Leo was there, arranging coffee pots. "Get a load of 12B, Bellamy muttered, loud enough for Kenna and the surrounding passengers to hear clearly. "First-time flyer, I bet. Thinks we're all going down in a ball of fire." Leo chuckled, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Gen Z on a plane. Probably saw a TikTok about a crash, and now she's freaking out." "Honestly," Bellamy continued, her voice a stage whisper that carried through the cabin. "The drama. You'd think she was the star of her own movie. Just breathe, sweetie. It's not that serious." She mimed, taking a deep, exaggerated breath and fanning herself dramatically, making Leo laugh again. The mockery was a physical blow. It sliced through the fog of Kenna's panic, adding a layer of burning humiliation to her terror. She wasn't just losing control. She was being ridiculed for it. She curled into a ball as best she could in the cramped seat, pressing her face against the cold plastic of the window, wishing she could disappear. The laughter from the galley, quiet but sharp, echoed in her ears long after the wheels of Flight 732 touched down on the runway. The aircraft taxied toward the terminal with a slowness that felt agonizing to Kenna. Her panic had subsided into the hollow, shaky aftermath, leaving her exhausted and raw. The humiliation, however, remained a fresh wound layered over the old. She could still hear Bellamy's mocking tone, Leo's tittering laugh. She kept her head down, her hair falling around her face as she pretended to search for something in her bag, avoiding the curious or pitying glances from the passengers around her. The fasten seatbelt sign finally extinguished with a soft ding. The cabin erupted into the familiar symphony of clicks from unbuckling belts, the rustle of jackets, and the thud of bags being pulled from overhead compartments. Kenna remained seated, waiting for the aisle to clear, wanting to be the last one off. She just wanted to disappear into the anonymity of the terminal. Bellamy and Leo stood at the door, their customer service smiles plastered back on their faces. "Bye-bye now," Bellamy chirped, her voice a saccharine melody that made Kenna's stomach clench. "Thanks for flying Global Air." As Kenna finally approached the exit, Bellamy met her gaze for a split second. There was no sympathy in her eyes, only a flicker of dismissive amusement before she moved on to the next passenger. Kenna walked past without a word, her cheeks burning, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The air in the terminal was cool and still. She took a deep breath, trying to recenter herself to shed the terrified girl in 12B and become Dr. Jordan again. She just needed a quiet corner and a bottle of water before meeting her contact. But as she emerged from the jet bridge into the bustling gate area, she saw him immediately. He stood out from the crowd of waiting families and weary travelers. A tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s with silvering hair and a deeply worried expression. He held a small sign that was barely necessary, given the intensity of his focus on the stream of disembarking passengers. The sign read, simply, Dr. Jordan. This was Mr. Peterson, the Vice President of Flight Operations for Global Air. His eyes scanned the crowd, passing over Kenna once, then snapping back a flicker of uncertainty in his expression. He was clearly expecting someone older, more imposing. Kenna squared her shoulders and walked toward him. "Mr. Peterson." Relief washed over his face, mixed with a hint of surprise. "Dr. Jordan. Thank God. I'm Jonathan Peterson. Thank you so much for coming on such short notice." He extended a hand, his grip firm and desperate. "Of course," Kenna replied, her voice still a bit hoarse. The situation sounded urgent. "To say the least," Peterson said, his voice low. "We have a car waiting. Captain Miller is at a private lounge in the international terminal. We wanted to ensure complete discretion." As they spoke, Bellamy and Leo emerged from the jet bridge, laughing about something. Bellamy was mid-sentence when she saw the scene, the young hysterical passenger from 12B, the one she'd openly mocked, shaking hands with one of the most powerful executives in the entire company. Bellamy's laughter died in her throat. Her smile froze, then melted away, replaced by a look of utter confusion. Leo stopped beside her, his own grin vanishing as he followed her gaze. They both stared, mouths slightly agape. Who was this girl? And why was the VP of Ops meeting her personally on the jet bridge like she was royalty? Peterson, noticing their gawking, turned his head slightly. His eyes, sharp and accustomed to command, narrowed on their uniforms and name tags. "Bellamy." "Leo," he said, his tone suddenly glacial. "Is there a problem?" Bellamy snapped to attention, a deer caught in the headlights. No, sir. Mr. Peterson, no problem at all. Just finishing up." Peterson's gaze lingered on her for a moment, an unspoken question hanging in the air. He then turned back to Kenna, his professional warmth returning. But Kenna saw the switch. She saw the calculation in his eyes as he clocked the flight crew from her flight. "Right this way, Doctor," Peterson said, gesturing for her to walk with him. "We have a lot to discuss. The wellness of our pilots is our absolute highest priority." He emphasized the word wellness as he gave the two flight attendants one last hard look. Kenna walked beside him, her professional demeanor now fully restored. She didn't look back, but she could feel their eyes on her. She could feel the sudden dawning horror radiating from them across the polished terminal floor. Bellamy and Leo stood frozen, watching the young woman in the sweatsuit walk away with the company vice president. The pieces began to click into place with sickening clarity. The urgent tone of the executive, the doctor title, the talk of pilot wellness. This wasn't some random teenage girl. "Oh my God." Leo whispered, his face pale. "Who is she?" Bellamy didn't answer. She was replaying the last 30 minutes in her head, her sneering comment, her exaggerated mockery in the galley. Leo's stupid, echoing laugh. Every single passenger in the surrounding rows had heard them, and if they had heard, the man next to her, the one who tried to help, had definitely heard. A cold dread, far more chilling than any turbulence, washed over her. She had built her 2-decade career on a foundation of seniority and unimpeachable professionalism in the eyes of management. In the span of a few minutes, she hadn't just been rude to a passenger. She had mocked a VIP consultant, a specialist in mental health, in front of witnesses, while that specialist was experiencing the very kind of crisis she was hired to address. The casual cruelty she had dished out at 35,000 feet was about to follow her down to the ground, and the landing was going to be anything but smooth. The private lounge was an oasis of quiet luxury, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the main terminal. The windows were tinted, the chairs were plush leather, and the silence was broken only by the soft hum of an air purifier. Jonathan Peterson led Kenner to a secluded corner where a man in a pilot's uniform sat rigidly staring into a cup of untouched coffee. This was Captain Robert Miller. He was a man who looked like he was carved from the same granite as the Rocky Mountains he'd flown over thousands of times. A square jaw, a distinguished silver crew cut, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was the picture of a veteran aviator, a man you'd trust with your life without a second thought. But up close, Kenner saw the cracks in the facade, the fine tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted towards the window at the distant sound of a taxiing jet, the deep, exhausted lines etched around his mouth. He stood as they approached, his movements stiff. "Dr. Jordan," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Robert Miller." "Captain," Kenner replied, shaking his hand. His palm was cold and clammy. "Thank you for meeting with me. Thank you for coming." Peterson interjected, his anxiety palpable. "Robert, please." "Robert, sit. Doctor, can I get you anything?" "Water, coffee." "Water would be great, thank you," Kenner said, taking the seat opposite Captain Miller. As Peterson went to the bar, an uncomfortable silence settled between the pilot and the specialist. Miller wouldn't meet her eyes. He just stared at the swirling brown liquid in his cup. Kenner didn't push. She had learned long ago that the most important thing in these initial moments was to create a space of safety. She simply sat, her presence calm and unthreatening, and waited. Finally, after Peterson returned with the water, Miller spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They want to ground me." "We want to help you, Robert," Peterson corrected gently. "Your record is exemplary. 28 years, not a single black mark. We don't want to lose a pilot of your caliber." "Then you shouldn't have put me back in the cockpit." Miller snapped, his voice cracking with a sudden surge of emotion. He took a deep, shuddering breath, composing himself. "I'm sorry. I told them I wasn't ready." Kenner leaned forward slightly. "Tell me what happened, Captain. The incident over the Pacific." Miller closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. For a moment it seemed he wouldn't speak. Then the story tumbled out, the words of a man reliving his own nightmare. "It was Flight 211, SFO to Tokyo," he began. 3 hours out over the middle of nowhere. Pitch black. We were at 39,000 feet. The weather was clear. Then, a flock of geese. At that altitude, unheard of. But it happened. He paused, swallowing hard. They hit the number 2 engine. A massive concussive boom shook the whole damn plane. Then the fire warning lit up the cockpit like a Christmas tree. My first officer, David Chen. He's a good kid, but he froze for a second. I didn't. I went through the checklist: engine shut down, fire extinguisher. Everything by the book. "You handled it perfectly, Robert," Peterson said. The report was clear on that. Handling it wasn't the problem. Miller countered, his voice raw. It was the sound, the explosion, and then the silence, the sudden unnatural quiet on my right side. All I could hear was the wind screaming past the fuselage and the one engine straining to keep us in the air. We were losing altitude. In that moment, I was sure we were going to die. 312 souls, all on me. He opened his eyes and Kenner saw the ghost he was living with. It was stark, undiluted terror. We diverted to Honolulu, made the landing. Nobody was hurt. They called me a hero. He said the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. A week later, they cleared me for duty. Said I was fine, but I'm not. Every time I get in the simulator now, as soon as the engines spool up, I'm back there, over the Pacific, in the dark. I feel the jolt, I hear the explosion. My hands start shaking so bad, I can't even hold the yoke steady. I had to abort my last 2 recertification sims. He looked at Kenner, his composure finally breaking. "I have a daughter starting college next year, Doctor. This job is all I have. It's all I am. And I'm terrified to do it. I'm a pilot who is terrified of the sky. What am I supposed to do?" The raw vulnerability of this powerful man filled the space between them. This was the core of her work. The trauma wasn't in the event itself, but in the echoes it left behind, the way it rewired a person's brain to see threats everywhere. "What you're experiencing, Captain," Kenner said, her voice soft but firm, "is a normal physiological and psychological response to an abnormal event. Your brain has created a powerful association between the stimuli of flight and a legitimate life or death threat. It's not a weakness, it's a survival mechanism that's now misfiring." She explained the concepts of amygdala hijacking and trauma loops using simple, clear language, demystifying the terrifying experience he was having. For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in Miller's eyes, understanding. Peterson watched the exchange, a knot of tension in his stomach, slowly beginning to loosen. This was why he'd called her. Her reputation was almost mythical. She had a way of reaching people no one else could. The airline had millions of dollars, and its reputation invested in pilots like Robert Miller. Her fee was astronomical, but the cost of losing a senior captain was infinitely higher. He felt a surge of gratitude for her presence, which was immediately followed by a cold, sickening thought. He remembered the flight attendants from her flight, Bellamy and Leo. He remembered their strange, panicked expressions. He remembered the way he'd seen them talking in the galley as he boarded early to check on a catering issue, laughing and looking back toward the main cabin. At the time, he'd thought nothing of it. Now a horrifying suspicion began to form in his mind. What if Dr. Jordan, the specialist he had brought in to handle the most delicate mental health crisis in his department, had been mistreated on one of his own flights, while she was on her way to save the career of one of his best men? The potential fallout was catastrophic. It wasn't just a customer service complaint. It was a profound institutional failure that struck at the very core of the wellness he had just touted. As Kenner continued to speak with Captain Miller, her voice a calm anchor in his storm, Peterson quietly excused himself. He pulled out his phone and made a call to the head of in-flight services. "Diane," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "I want the entire crew of Flight 732 from Denver in my office tomorrow morning at 0800 sharp. And I want you to pull the passenger manifest. I need the contact information for the man who was sitting in 12C. He was no longer just concerned about Captain Miller. He was now on the hunt for a rot that he feared had taken root within his own company. and he was going to tear it out. The next morning, the 34th floor executive wing of Global Air's headquarters felt like a pressurized cabin. The air was thin and cold. Jonathan Peterson stood by his panoramic window, watching the endless ballet of aircraft taking off and landing at SFO. But his mind was far from the beauty of the scene. On his desk lay a preliminary incident report, a transcript of a phone call and a steaming cup of black coffee he hadn't touched. At precisely 8:00 a.m., his assistant buzzed. "Bellamy Jensen and Leo Valdez are here, sir." "Send them in," he said, turning from the window. Bellamy and Leo entered the office, their crisp uniforms looking more like costumes of confidence they no longer felt. The swagger Bellamy usually carried was gone, replaced by a rigid posture of defensive anxiety. Leo looked like a schoolboy about to be expelled, his gaze fixed on the plush carpet. "Sit," Peterson commanded, gesturing to the two chairs opposite his massive mahogany desk. The word was not an invitation. It was an order. They sat. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Peterson let it linger, watching them, letting their nerves shred. Finally, he spoke, his voice deceptively calm. "I have a simple question for you both. I want you to describe the service and passenger interactions on Flight 732 from Denver yesterday. Specifically, I'm interested in the events surrounding the passenger in seat 12B. Bellamy's training kicked in. "It was a routine flight, sir. Smooth service. The passenger in 12B appeared to be a nervous flyer. She experienced some anxiety during landing." Her answer was clinical, scrubbed of all incriminating detail. "Anxiety," Peterson repeated, his eyes boring into hers. "Is that what you call a full-blown panic attack?" Bellamy flinched. She was distressed, yes. We monitored the situation to ensure she wasn't a danger to herself or others. Monitored the situation. Peterson picked up a sheet of paper. "That's interesting, because I spoke with the passenger in 12C this morning, a gentleman named Frank Miller, no relation to the captain," he added pointedly. "A corporate lawyer and a million-mile flyer with us. He has a slightly different recollection of how you monitored the situation." He looked down at the transcript of his call with Frank. "The lead attendant," he says, "was incredibly dismissive. She rolled her eyes and told the poor girl to just breathe. Then she went back to the galley and openly mocked her with her colleague. They called her a drama queen, a Gen Z snowflake. They were laughing about it. It was unprofessional and cruel. I was appalled." Peterson looked up, his face a mask of cold fury. "Does that sound like monitoring the situation to you, Bellamy?" Bellamy's face went white. Leo sank deeper into his chair, looking as if he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "Sir, it may have been a misunderstanding." Bellamy began, her voice trembling slightly. "There is no misunderstanding." Peterson slammed the transcript on the desk. The sound made both flight attendants jump. "You didn't see a passenger in distress. You saw a target, a young black girl you could stereotype and ridicule for your own amusement. You did this in front of a cabin full of our customers. You created a hostile, humiliating environment for a paying passenger." He stood up and began to pace behind his desk. "But it gets so much worse for you. Do you have any idea who the passenger in 12B was?" They both shook their heads, their eyes wide with fear. "Her name is Dr. Kenna Jordan," Peterson said, stopping to lean his knuckles on the desk, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "She is a leading specialist in neuropsychology and trauma recovery. Specifically, she is a consultant for the Department of Defense, the FAA, and now for this airline. She works with fighter pilots who have been shot down and commercial pilots who have survived catastrophic failures. She is one of the foremost experts in the world on the very kind of panic and trauma responses you witnessed." The blood drained from Leo's face. Bellamy let out a small, strangled gasp. I brought Dr. Jordan here on an emergency basis to save the career of one of our most senior captains. Peterson continued, his voice rising with controlled rage. I put her on that flight. I entrusted her to your care, and you, in your infinite wisdom and breathtaking arrogance, decided to mock her while she was having a legitimate medical episode, an episode likely triggered by a sound that her brain, more than almost anyone else's on Earth, associates with aviation disaster. He let the weight of his words settle in the room. Your behavior wasn't just unprofessional. It was an act of corporate sabotage. It was a slap in the face to every single employee at this company who genuinely cares about passenger well-being. It jeopardized a critical consultation that affects the safety and stability of our entire flight operations. He finally returned to his chair, his demeanor shifting from rage to icy finality. You are both suspended effective immediately. Hand over your company IDs and access badges before you leave this office. You will be contacted by Human Resources regarding the next steps of this formal investigation, and I assure you it will be thorough. Bellamy finally found her voice, a desperate, pleading squeak. Mr. Peterson, I have been with this airline for 22 years. I have a perfect record. No, Peterson countered coldly. You have a 22-year history of not getting caught. Your seniority doesn't grant you a license for cruelty. Now get out of my office. They stumbled out, utterly broken. The door clicked shut, leaving Peterson alone in the silence. He felt no satisfaction, only a profound sense of anger and disappointment. The incident exposed a sickness he hadn't seen, a complacency and lack of empathy that had festered under his nose. His next call was to Dr. Jordan. "Doctor," he said when she answered. "Jonathan Peterson, I am so profoundly sorry. I've been made aware of the conduct of the crew on your flight yesterday. It is inexcusable, and I want to assure you that we are taking it with the utmost seriousness." There was a pause on the other end. When Kenna spoke, her voice was calm and measured, devoid of the panic from the day before. "Mr. Peterson, I appreciate the call. My primary concern right now is Captain Miller." "Of course," he said, humbled by her professionalism. "But your well-being matters. The crew has been suspended pending a full investigation. Their conduct was beyond the pale. We will support whatever course of action you feel is appropriate." "I see," Kenna said slowly, processing the information. "I may need to speak with them, particularly the lead flight attendant." Peterson was taken aback. "You want to speak with her, doctor? You are under no obligation." "I understand," Kenna interrupted gently. "But this incident, it's become more than just a case of poor customer service. It's a data point, a symptom of a much larger problem. And if we're going to fix the problem for your pilots, we might need to understand the ignorance that allows this kind of thing to happen in the first place." Peterson was silent for a moment, stunned by her capacity to turn a personal humiliation into a teachable moment. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking to understand the root of the problem, to dissect it with the same clinical precision she applied to a pilot's trauma. In that moment, he knew he hadn't just hired a consultant. He had stumbled upon someone who might be able to change the entire culture of his airline. "Whatever you need, doctor," he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "You'll have it." 2 days later, Bellamy Jensen found herself in a place she never imagined she'd be: a sterile, anonymous conference room in a budget hotel near the airport, a location chosen for its neutrality. She had been summoned by HR for what she was told was a mediation session as part of the ongoing investigation. She had spent the last 48 hours in a state of suspended terror, her career of 2 decades hanging by a single fraying thread. She expected to face a panel of HR representatives and stern-faced union reps. She did not expect the door to open and for Dr. Kenna Jordan to walk in alone. Kenna was no longer the frightened girl in the sweatsuit. Today she wore a tailored navy blue blazer, charcoal slacks, and low heels. Her hair was styled professionally, and her expression was calm and unreadable. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with an aura of quiet authority that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. She looked every bit the high-level consultant she was. Bellamy stood up instinctively, her heart pounding. "Dr. Jordan." "Ms. Jensen," Kenna said, her voice even. "Please sit." Kenna took the seat opposite her at the small table. She opened her portfolio but didn't look at it. Her focus was entirely on Bellamy. "I requested this meeting," Kenna began, "because I believe there are things that need to be said outside the confines of a formal HR investigation." Bellamy's hands were clammy. She clasped them in her lap. I want to apologize," she stammered. "My behavior was unprofessional. There's no excuse." It was the apology of a person trying to save their job, a recitation of expected words. Kenna held up a hand, a gesture that was not unkind, but clearly stopped the scripted apology in its tracks. "I'm not here for an apology, Bellamy. I'm here for an explanation, not for me, but for yourself. I want you to tell me what you saw when you looked at me in seat 12B. The question caught Bellamy off guard. I saw a passenger who was afraid of flying." "No." Kenna said, her gaze unwavering. "Be more specific. Be honest. What did you see?" Bellamy hesitated, the silence stretching. The truth was ugly, and she knew it. "I saw a kid," she admitted, her voice dropping. "A young girl getting hysterical over nothing. I thought she was being dramatic." "You thought she was being dramatic," Kenna repeated softly. "You saw a young black woman, and you made an assumption. You defaulted to a stereotype, the emotional, overly dramatic girl who couldn't handle herself. You didn't see a person in legitimate clinical distress. You saw a caricature, and based on that caricature, you and your colleague felt entitled to mock her." Every word was a precisely placed scalpel cutting away Bellamy's defenses. "Do you know what a panic attack feels like, Bellamy?" Kenna asked, her tone shifting from analytical to instructive. "It's not drama. It's a physiological betrayal. Your sympathetic nervous system floods your body with adrenaline because your brain is screaming that you are about to die. Your heart rate skyrockets. You can't breathe. Your vision narrows. You lose control of your own body. It is one of the most terrifying experiences a human being can have. It is not a choice." Bellamy could only stare, shame washing over her in a sickening wave. "Now let's talk about trauma." Kenna continued, her voice gaining an edge of intensity. "The people I work with, the pilots you fly with every day, are masters of control. Their entire profession is about maintaining a calm, logical exterior while managing immense risk. But they are human, and trauma can shatter that control in an instant. It can be triggered by a sound, a smell, a vibration. A sound like, for instance, the locking of landing gear." Bellamy visibly paled as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for her. "The captain of your flight home could be a man like Robert Miller," Kenna said, her voice low and powerful. "A man who is a hero, who saved over 300 lives, but who is now haunted by the sound of an engine exploding. A man whose career and identity are on the line because his brain is replaying his worst nightmare every time he steps into a cockpit." She leaned forward, and for the first time, Bellamy saw a flash of fire in her eyes. "Imagine that man is a passenger on your flight, not in uniform. He's flying to see his family, trying to feel normal again. The landing gear deploys and he has a panic attack just like mine. And the flight crew, the very people who are supposed to be trained for medical emergencies, stand in the galley and laugh at him. They call him weak. They call him a drama queen." She let the scenario hang in the air. "What do you think that does to him?" to his recovery. You could single-handedly destroy years of therapy and a man's entire career with a few cheap jokes. That is the damage you are capable of. That is the power you wielded so carelessly. Tears began to well in Bellamy's eyes, not tears of self-pity, but tears of genuine, soul-crushing shame. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about her job or her pension. She was seeing the gaping, ugly chasm of her own ignorance and the harm it had caused. I never thought of it that way, she whispered the words, tasting like poison. I know. Kenna said, her tone softening almost imperceptibly. That's the problem. You've been flying for 22 years. You've become desensitized. You see passengers not as people with complex inner lives, but as a series of problems to be managed, the drunk in 21C, the fussy baby in 8A, the nervous flyer in 12B. You've lost your empathy. Kenna sat back, her point made. The room was silent, except for Bellamy's quiet, hitching sobs. Mr. Peterson is prepared to terminate you, and he would be well within his rights to do so, Kenna stated calmly. What you did was grounds for immediate dismissal. However, I am going to make a recommendation to him. Firing you solves the problem of Bellamy Jensen. It doesn't solve the problem of the hundreds of other Bellamys in this airline and across the industry. Bellamy looked up, confused, a glimmer of hope warring with her despair. I am going to recommend that your termination be held in abeyance, Kenna said. On one condition, that you and Leo become the first two participants in a new mandatory training protocol I will be designing for Global Air. It will be an intensive months-long program focused on trauma recognition, de-escalation, and empathetic response. It will involve simulation sessions with psychologists and direct testimony from passengers and crew who have experienced traumatic events. It will be the hardest training you have ever endured, and you will not get your wings back until I personally sign off on your certification. It wasn't a pardon. It was a sentence, but a sentence of education, not banishment. It was a chance, however slim, at redemption. Why? Bellamy asked, her voice thick with emotion. Why would you do that for me? Kenna looked at her, her expression holding a universe of meaning. Because I'm not in the business of punishment, Bellamy. I'm in the business of recovery. And it seems to me that your empathy is just as grounded as Captain Miller's courage. My job is to see if both can be taught to fly again. The main boardroom at Global Air Headquarters was a place where careers were made and broken. It was a room of quiet power, dominated by a long, polished table that reflected the nervous faces of those summoned to it. Bellamy Jensen and Leo Valdez sat at one end, looking small and insignificant. At the other end sat Jonathan Peterson, the head of HR and the airline's chief legal counsel. In the middle, at the head of the table, sat Dr. Kenna Jordan. The past month had been a whirlwind. Kenna, while working intensively with Captain Miller on his recovery, had also drafted the framework for a revolutionary new training program. It was unlike anything the airline industry had ever seen. It moved beyond the standard, here's how to handle a disruptive passenger, and into the complex, nuanced world of human psychology. She had named it the Aviation Compassion and Response Engagement Protocol, or ACRE. But internally, everyone was already calling it the Jordan Protocol. Peterson cleared his throat, the formal meeting beginning. We are here today to deliver the final disposition regarding the formal complaint filed against flight attendants Bellamy Jensen and Leo Valdez. After a thorough investigation, we have found that your conduct on Flight 732 was in gross violation of company policy, demonstrated a stunning lack of professional judgment, and failed to meet even the most basic standards of passenger care. The recommendation from this board was for immediate termination. Bellamy and Leo flinched, the words landing like blows. However, Peterson continued, turning his gaze toward Kenner, we also received a separate recommendation from Dr. Jordan, a recommendation that we have, after much consideration, decided to adopt. He slid 2 thick binders across the table toward them. Dr. Jordan has argued that termination is a simple solution to a complex problem. It removes the individuals, but does not address the underlying cultural issue. Therefore, your employment is not being terminated today. It is being suspended indefinitely, contingent on your successful completion of the ACRE protocol. Leo opened the binder, his eyes wide, as he scanned the table of contents. It was a brutal schedule. 6 weeks of intensive classroom work on the neurology of fear and trauma. Role-playing scenarios with actors trained to simulate everything from a PTSD flashback to a grief-stricken passenger. Mandatory sessions with a staff psychologist. It concluded with a final evaluation simulation, a flight in the full-scale cabin simulator where they would be tested on everything they had learned. The pass-fail condition was absolute, was this program. Kenner spoke for the first time, her voice filling the room with quiet authority. Is not a punishment. It is an opportunity. You will learn to recognize the subtle signs of psychological distress. You will learn the difference between anxiety and a panic attack. You will learn de-escalation techniques grounded in neuroscience, not just customer service scripts. You will sit down with pilots who have survived near disasters and listen to their stories. You will listen to passengers who have been mistreated, misunderstood, and marginalized on our aircraft. You will learn to see the human being, not the seat number. She looked directly at Bellamy. Your 22 years of experience, Bellamy, have taught you the mechanics of your job. This program will teach you the meaning of it. You will be the test case. If you can learn, anyone can. If you fail, you will be an example of why this program is so necessary. The karma was not a simple firing. It was harder, more profound. Bellamy wasn't just losing her job. She was being forced to dismantle and rebuild her entire professional identity under the guidance of the very person she had victimized. She would have to confront her biases, her arrogance and her ignorance day after day, week after week. Her path back to the sky was not through a union grievance, but through a deep personal reckoning. Her career was now entirely in Kenner Jordan's hands. For Leo, who had followed Bellamy's lead, it was a chance to find his own moral compass. The choice was clear. Embrace this brutal education and become a better flight attendant and a better person, or walk away and carry the shame of his actions forever. The first session is Monday at 0800, Kenner concluded, closing her portfolio. Don't be late. As the meeting adjourned, a separate story of recovery was unfolding across the bay. In a flight simulator, Captain Robert Miller sat in the captain's seat, with Kenner in the observer's chair behind him. He was flying the final leg of the SFO Tokyo route, the one from his trauma. Okay, Robert, Kenner said softly through his headset. We're approaching the point of the incident. I want you to focus on your breathing. Anchor yourself to the feel of the controls in your hands. You are here. You are safe. His knuckles were white, but he was breathing steadily. I'm okay, Doc. I'm okay. As they passed the virtual waypoint, the simulator remained quiet. There was no sound of a bird strike, no jolt of an engine failure. There was only the calm, steady hum of the engines and the voice of air traffic control. He flew through the ghost, and it did not touch him. He landed the simulated Boeing 777 perfectly at Narita International Airport. As the plane came to a stop, he let out a long, shuddering breath he seemed to have been holding for months. He took off his headset and turned to look at Kenner, tears of relief shining in his eyes. I did it, he whispered. "You did it, Captain," Kenna said, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Welcome back." The karma wasn't just about punishment for the crew. It was about healing for the pilot. While Bellamy and Leo were beginning their grueling journey of forced introspection, Robert Miller was ending his emerging from the darkness, ready to fly again. The ripples of that one flight, of that one moment of cruelty, were reshaping lives in ways no one could have predicted. 6 months later, the culture at Global Air had begun a seismic shift. The Jordan Protocol was no longer a pilot program for 2 disgraced flight attendants. It was now a mandatory certification for every single new hire and a required recurrent training for all 8,000 of the airline's in-flight crew members. Dr. Kenna Jordan, initially brought in for a single consultation, now held a permanent advisory role, her influence reshaping policy from the ground up. Captain Robert Miller was back in the cockpit, flying long-haul routes with a renewed confidence. But he was a changed man. He became an outspoken advocate for mental health within the pilot community, heading a new peer support program, encouraging pilots to speak up about their struggles without fear of losing their wings. His near disaster had, with Kenna's help, become a catalyst for a healthier, more open culture among the airline's most critical employees. In a brightly lit cabin simulator, a training session for the Jordan Protocol was underway. The scenario was a difficult one. A passenger played by an actor was having a severe emotional breakdown, grieving the recent loss of a parent. A group of new hire flight attendants watched as their trainer handled the situation with remarkable skill. The trainer knelt by the passenger's seat, speaking in low, calming tones. She didn't offer platitudes or try to quiet him down. She listened. She validated his feelings. She offered him a bottle of water and a quiet space in the galley if he needed it. She treated him with profound dignity and compassion. The trainer was Bellamy Jensen. She was not the same woman who had boarded Flight 732 6 months ago. The hard shell of cynicism had been stripped away, replaced by a quiet competence grounded in genuine empathy. The training had broken her down and then rebuilt her. She had been forced to confront the ugliest parts of herself, and in doing so had discovered a capacity for compassion she never knew she possessed. She had passed the protocol's final evaluation with the highest score in the program's short history. Kenna had personally approved her return to flying status, but Bellamy had surprised everyone by asking for a different role. She requested to become one of the lead instructors for the new protocol. "I can't think of anyone better to teach this," she had told Kenna and Peterson, "because I know what it's like to be on the other side. I am the perfect before picture." Leo Valdez had also passed the program. He was back to flying, but his demeanor was different. The eager-to-please nervousness was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful confidence. He was often the first to spot a passenger in distress, the first to offer a kind word or a helping hand. He had learned to lead with compassion, not to follow the crowd. On a flight to Dallas, Leo noticed an elderly woman traveling alone, looking confused and frightened. He spent 20 minutes with her, patiently explaining the connecting flight information and drawing her a map of the terminal. He made sure a gate agent was waiting to assist her when they landed. He didn't do it because it was in a manual. He did it because he now saw the person, not just the passenger. The story of Flight 732 became a quiet legend within the company, a cautionary tale and an origin story for the new way of doing things. It was a stark reminder that every passenger had a story, and that appearance told you nothing about the weight they carried. Kenna Jordan stood in the observation deck at SFO, watching the planes take off her work, with the airline nearly complete. Her intervention had started as a response to one pilot's trauma and one crew's cruelty, but it had grown into a systemic overhaul of the airline's entire approach to passenger care. The hard karma that had hit Bellamy and Leo wasn't a lightning bolt of revenge, but a long, arduous path to redemption that in the end had created something far more valuable than punishment. It had created change. It was a testament to the idea that sometimes the most profound transformations don't come from firing the problem, but from forcing the problem to become the solution. The laughter that had echoed in that galley 6 months ago had been silenced, replaced by a new chorus of compassionate professional voices, ensuring that no passenger on a global air flight would ever have their pain be the source of someone else's amusement again. The story of Dr. Kenna Jordan and Flight 732 is a powerful reminder that the people we meet are always more than they appear. A dismissive laugh and a cruel whisper can cause more damage than any turbulence, while an act of empathy can change or even save a life. This wasn't just about a flight crew getting their comeuppance. It was about transformative justice where the punishment for ignorance became the curriculum for enlightenment. It shows how one person's refusal to be just a victim can ripple outward, changing an entire corporate culture for the better. We all have the power to be a Bellamy or a Kenna in our daily lives, to choose judgment or to choose understanding. If this story of karma consequence and the incredible power of empathy resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Every story matters, and your support helps us bring more of them to light. Thank you for listening.